Hey, how's everybody doing? Um, just wanted to do a quick brief before this New Hampshire primary and talk about a couple other things. First of all, if any of y'all were out here for our Brooklyn Live show, I just want to thank you so much for coming out. It was a really exciting show. It was great to be able to put a name to the face of so many different people. And, we had a really good time with Ben Burgess, Harvey K, Brandon Sutton, and Matt Bender. We're definitely, we're going to try to do more of those in the future. We're going to Austin on April 3rd, so be sure to come by. Really appreciate all the support that we get, and it's been so great to meet everybody. But here we go. We got another big night ahead of us. New Hampshire's coming up. It's looking, from what I've been seeing so far, pretty good for Bernie. It looks like people are coming out, and as we've seen, this Iowa debacle has really sucked a lot of the oxygen out of the real momentum that Bernie's having, but it doesn't seem like it's affecting voters in New Hampshire, which is awesome. Another really exciting thing is the fact that Joe Biden seems to be in complete collapse. I was seeing earlier today that Joe Biden's not even going to attend his own victory party. So that's a huge victory. I mean, a couple months ago, we were all worried that this was going to be a very, it was going to be Biden versus Bernie, and it's looking more and more that the Biden support's falling out, which is huge. Thanks so much, Fire Boy. I really appreciate the super chat donation, and for everyone else, for sure, if you can hit us up with the super chat, we're really trying to expand our YouTube channel and all the work that we're doing. But we're running into snags with YouTube, so being able to help us out in that way is wonderful. And I love being able to talk to y'all during these live streams. Hey, Kennedy, and it's great to see everybody coming in. Yeah, so I mean, we're about an hour away from polls closing in New Hampshire. I think the last polls close at 8, but the majority of them close at 7. So it's looking phenomenal right now. For Bernie, it's looking like this could be a real momentum shift. We got to hit Buttigieg hard, but I got to say, as I was saying earlier, the way that this race is sort of shaped out, that it's really starting to look like it's between Bernie and Buttigieg actually is a good thing for Bernie. Now, Mayor Pete is obviously a very cynical guy, and he's going to use anything he can to win, but he doesn't have the institutions across the country that are going to really be able to propel him forward. If you look at it, he spent so much money in New Hampshire and in Iowa. He doesn't have a strong base in states like California or Texas or South Carolina that's going to be able to propel him forward. So it actually is a really good thing that Buttigieg has been sort of, sapping up the majority of the centrist vote in these first couple of primaries, or the New Hampshire caucus and the New Hampshire primary and the Iowa caucus. Is a good thing because it really weakens Biden's position and it only increases our ability. Now, the big question going forward is what's going to happen with these Warren supporters, which has been very frustrating still, as we've seen that, the Warren campaign has not been able to really, create any kind of real strong grassroots supports like the Bernie Sanders campaign, whether or not these people are going to come and support Bernie Sanders in the future. I think that they will. I think that we should be encouraging people to realize that if you want to have a progressive in the White House, if you want to push back against years and years of failed neoliberal policies, Bernie Sanders is the way to go. But the fact is that what we've seen over the past couple of weeks is Bernie Sanders is being attacked left and right. And he's being attacked with the most bogus claims, from Chris Matthews accusing him of basically being a murdering Maoist ready to start killing people in the streets, to David Frum saying that, sorry, I can't even say it. David Frum saying that Donald Trump, remember this, Donald Trump is going to attack Bernie Sanders on his toxic masculinity. Now, obviously, this is nonsense, but this is the way that they're attacking him going forward. And thank you so much, Friedrich. I really appreciate it. It's great to see people watching from all over the world. It's really been great to see just how much we've grown the past year, moving everybody together and trying to build those coalitions across the across the Atlantic, across the Americas. It's really wonderful. So thanks so much for the super chat donation for sure. But yeah, so we're building this movement and they're attacking us with all of this nonsense, and we're able to barrel through it. I'm sure people saw on Twitter today, there was a great little video of a woman who said that she's now voting for Bernie Sanders because MSNBC has been attacking him so much. I think that more and more people that I've been talking to, especially people who are less political, they're starting to realize that there's a narrative being pushed and it's not reflective of the narrative that they're experiencing from the mainstream media. So we have a lot of momentum on our side right now. Things are really moving in our direction, and they can't beat Bernie on policy. They can't beat Bernie on the movement. So that's why they're making up all of these nonsense lies. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not a problem. And people who are able to pump out as much as they can does really damage him. Somebody like Bloomberg is a worry, not because I necessarily think Bloomberg is going to be able to move the needle in the country, but because he can do a lot of damage in the meantime and really confuse a lot of Democratic voters, allowing people to get, to sort of be able to take advantage of Bernie Sanders' fight with some of the more progressive campaigns like the Warren campaign, DeYang, and the Gabbard campaign. If those people aren't going to drop out early enough, it could become a problem down the line. Thanks so much, McGillespie. I love the compliment. And any thoughts on Bernie potentially flipping Texas? I think that he is absolutely gunning for winning Texas, not only in the primary, but also in the general election. He opened up offices, I think, today in Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston. So he's building that apparatus. And that's what I was starting, for people who've just come in, I was starting to talk about how the fact that Buttigieg is like the number one contender against Bernie right now is probably a good thing going down the line, because Buttigieg has spent all of his money and is basically banked on Iowa, New Hampshire being good for him. And the fact that Bernie's been able to pull away support from both of those states, and it's looking like New Hampshire is going to be a very good night for Bernie Sanders, is good, because now Buttigieg has sort of sucked up all the delegates from people like Biden. And Buttigieg doesn't have the campaign infrastructure to run successful campaigns, especially in these bigger states like California, and Texas, and all across the Super Tuesday states. I think Buttigieg is going to start bleeding a lot at that area. So it's good, actually, that he had his momentum now so that Bernie can continue riding his wave. And what we're seeing is that Bernie Sanders is, really starting to focus on California and Texas. And I think they're going to be really good states for them. I'm very frustrated to see the Secretary of State in Texas came out recently and said that they're not going to be able, they're very unlikely to be able to release the results from the Democratic primary on time, which is a very frustrating thing, just knowing, one, the history of the Republican Party when it comes to free and fair elections is very bad. And two, the fact that Republicans will be sort of handling that election, and that the Democrats gave them the opportunity, the Democrats gave them the opportunity, Republicans to be able to have an excuse. Well, you messed up your caucus in Iowa, so why are you getting mad at us for messing up our, these elections in Texas? It's a really big problem. But still, the Bernie campaign, the grassroots movement there is looking really strong. People have been gunning for this for a long time. I know, like, Heidi Sloan's campaign for a while has been doing what they're calling big ass canvases, where they're knocking on doors for Heidi Sloan and Bernie Sanders, and really building out that movement is something that I think is going to look really good for states like Texas, not just in this election, but going forward. We're an hour away. The Warren campaign's looking like it's going to be a no-go with people. Hopefully those people are going to start, seeing the light and coming back to Bernie Sanders. It's been very unfortunate to see this movement be very nasty and cruel to the Bernie Sanders, the kind of lies and nonsense that they've been pushing against us. Hopefully we can get over that. I think that they're going to see the light. So I think that this is an opportunity. Hopefully Warren doesn't run like a burn the earth campaign and stays in all the way to the convention. But the fact is we really need to start talking strategy, is that the way that it's looking, there's a lot of candidates who I think are going to try to hold on as long as possible. Because if you can hold on as long as possible, then the Democratic establishment will eventually coalesce around you. And I think that's certainly the plan with people like Klobuchar, who don't have like a lot of organic support. But I also think Warren is looking at that more and more, that she knows if she's able to stay in long enough and, pick up a couple delegates here and there, that eventually when other people start dropping out, then the Democratic establishment will coalesce around her. So that's a problem. We really need to start saying to people, if you want progressive in the White House, we need to make sure that we're not splitting the vote, because it's looking more and more like, some of these other campaigns are sort of hoping that maybe they'll be the last people, like in the same way that the Republicans tried to do with Trump. Where 1 week it was Kasich, the other was Ted Cruz. Who's going to be the great hope against Donald Trump? I think the Democratic Party is certainly going to try to do the same thing against Bernie Sanders. Thanks so much, Daniel Hilton. All love, but you look like AJ Styles. I don't know who that is, so I'm hoping that's a good thing. So it's looking good tonight. There's a couple things that I really wanted to hit too. Before we moved in, because we really can't take our eyes off the ball. One, we need to have solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en people. I talked about this in the gem last week. Unfortunately, over the weekend, there were major arrests, and the RCMP, the Canadian police, have been arresting people who are defending their lands from this horrific pipeline being pushed through by the Liberal government of Trudeau. Remember, the Wet'suwet'en people never went into treaties with the Canadian government, so this is actually unceded land. It's still their land, and the fact is that the Canadian government is now, as they do in the United States, now that there's natural resources or some kind of like economic opportunity for the rich to take advantage of, now they start to look at those treaty rulings or non-treaty rulings, as in the cases with them. They start to ignore them, which is a big problem. I saw yesterday that one of the hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en Nation was arrested by the police. So, we really need to be sure that we're keeping our eye on the ball. Obviously, there's a lot of excitement with these primaries, and we need to be putting as much energy as possible toward them. But we also need to make sure that we're not turning our backs on our friends in Native peoples, because that's a very important movement, and it's something that the left really needs to be championing as much as possible. So absolute solidarity there. Donald Trump is really starting to push his budget nonsense, trying to make major cuts to social programs in the United States. And while that's not unusual for a Republican, what we're seeing right now is the Fed, the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, has now been pushing Congress to lower the deficit. So let's just remember what's happened since the financial crisis. The Federal Reserve has basically propped up the short-term interests of the capital class in the United States at the expense of the working class. And now, because interest rates are so low, the Federal Reserve is now saying, well, we've had to keep interest rates so low, so now you need to make the working class pay. So you need to cut services for them. You need to make sure that you're not expanding healthcare, that you're not doing the bare minimum to help out people who need the most help right now, who have not benefited from this economic recovery. And remember that, when these kind of things, they seem sort of boring sometimes, the Federal Reserve policy, but these are actually like how they directly waged class war. And now that the Federal Reserve is trying to push this class war against us, we need to be standing up together and being very clear about our opposition to this, and not let any Democrats, any coward Democrats, start buying into this deficit nonsense, because this is 100% a war on working class people for the benefit of the rich. So what the Federal Reserve is saying is like, we can't pay any more money to keep the economy afloat. We spent all of our resources and all of our energy and basically what's in our toolbox for the US economy for the benefit of the rich, and now we need to make the poor pay. We can't accept that at all. And we need to make sure that Donald Trump is not able is not able to push forward these horrible plans that he's been coming forward with. I know he's talking about getting rid of loan forgiveness programs. I mean, he's really waging a very disgusting war on the working class. Tristan says, Griscom, you seem to have a pretty decent grasp of Iranian history, including in antiquity. Did you study it at uni? A little bit, but I've sort of, for kind of like redneck kid from the South, I've had a lot of Iranians in my life. I have family members who are Iranian. My best friend is an Iranian person, and at university, actually, one of my great philosophy professors was an Iranian as well. So it's actually a culture and people that are very close to my heart. And people, if you're not familiar with Iran, it's actually is probably one of the most interesting and beautiful cultures. The food is incredible. The people are so lovely. Has one of the best poetry movements and traditions out of most cultures. It's a really beautiful culture, and if you have the opportunity to experience it, I highly suggest that you build those connections. But yeah, to get back on track. So we have this big moment tonight, and I think it's looking really good. New Hampshire is Bernie country. Bernie has been looking good for a very long time there. Now, the next step is, where do we go from here? So we have this incredible opportunity, this Bernie Sanders movement. And a very crucial part of this Bernie Sanders movement is that it doesn't just end with Bernie Sanders, right? It doesn't just end with him, and we're building this kind of left-wing democratic socialist movement. So Eric says, hey, dude, I'm sure I spotted you in a YouTube video of a young crowd in New York City looking for Wall Street Pete last week. Was that you? It wasn't. I'm sad to hear that there's other people who are sort of trying to snag my style in New York, but no, I wasn't out there. But it's been great to see all of the people in the mobilization in this city. It's definitely exciting. But I really want to hit this before I have to go. There's a couple quick lessons I want to hit. So the reading this week that we did for patrons was a reading by Ralph Miliband, who was a really important democratic thinker and socialist in the UK. He was a really important Labour Party theorist. And he has a really interesting text called Beyond Social Democracy, which was published in 1985. If you're not a patron, definitely check out that text. It's really important. And it really hits something that I think we need to start talking about a lot more in our movement, which is that, there is this historical tension between, revolutionary kind of Leninist movements and social democratic movements. And the problem with the social democratic movements, for the most part, is that they've actually worked as a check on working class power. Even though they say the same thing in the Democratic Party, right? Oh, well, we can't be too radical because we'll lose voters. Well, there's no precedent anywhere in the world for the working class, a strong, like unionized, militant working class, to turn their backs on a left-wing political party because they were too radical. In fact, it's been the opposite. You had all these movements going into the moving these parties to the center, and that's when you start to see the bleeding of these working class movements. Now, the problem with a lot of these kind of Leninist models that don't turn their back rhetorically on the working class is, one, that they're oftentimes very small. They're not rooted in working class movements. And because of the way that these parties are organized, they tend to create kind of personality cults. There's a lot of issues. If you dissent, you're kicked out. And they end up being a good way for a small group of people to hold power. And they're not able to create these kind of coalitions that can win in politics. And you've seen that in the UK and a lot of European parties. And for sure, you've seen that in the United States, where for the most part, the Leninist model, and don't get me wrong, like I read Lenin a lot. Lenin is a huge influence on my political theory. But a lot of the kind of Marxist-Leninist parties in the West have been unable to create the strong political support that's needed. So Ralph Miliband tries to find a way to deal with this, where we're able to build radical demands that work through, electoral platforms, but also are building their own power structures outside of those parties. So they're not falling into the trap of just constantly reforming in a way that that a kind of traitor can come into power and then pull back all those reforms. He argues that we need to be doing something where he calls revolutionary reforms, where we're pushing changes to the capitalist system when we have the power to do so, but we're making these changes not only so effective for people's everyday life, but effective in decommodifying space, fighting against capitalist power in our lives. And so that's something, for example, even though it's very much something that exists in the rest of the world, like Medicare for all, for example, that is a radical move, right? Because it takes the power of the employers, because that's really what healthcare in this country is about. It's a power game. And it's a power game for your employer to be able to say, if you leave this job, then you will not have access to healthcare. And if you get sick, you'll die, right? That is fundamentally what this is. It's trying to have something to hold over you to make you less likely to leave, right? And that's the United States. Employers offer lots of benefits that should be offered by the community and by the people, but instead they're offered by private employers. And why is that? Because the rich want to be your masters constantly, right? So pulling that power away can be a radical revolutionary reform. If you, one, do it with radical and revolutionary language that is making people aware of these power dynamics, and two, you're doing it in a way that is always bringing more and more power back to the working class people directly, instead of creating a political class that is dominant. And this is really important because what's happening right now is we're seeing all of this movement in the United States specifically, where left-wing politics is looking like it has the potential to take power. And we not only need to win these elections in the short term, so for example, getting Bernie Sanders elected, making sure that the people who got elected in 2018, these radicals like AOC and the Squad, etc., are able to maintain power and get more people elected. Right? That's something that's a short-term goal, but the long-term goal is to have a working class movement that's able to stand on its own 2 feet. Hopefully, without needing the support of the Democratic establishment, which has been against us from the very beginning. So we need to be building this class consciousness. And that's something that a lot of people have difficulty with because they don't understand that that's going to take work. Nobody is born. So for example, like you might have a vague idea if you're a working class person that your boss is a schmuck and you get work too hard and you don't get paid enough. But without rooting that in a class analysis and an analysis of capitalism, you're going to think of it as an individual. And it's great to stand up for yourself, but where we really have power is when we stand up together and we are able to work together as a unit, as a working class as a whole. And we need to be building that class consciousness as much as possible because the bourgeoisie has a very strong class consciousness. They very much understand what they're doing. You see it in institutions. They make capitalism look like a natural system. It's not. And they couch it in the language of the Enlightenment and freedom. But the historical irony of the bourgeois movements that created capitalism was that these were movements of freedom. We're talking about trying to create freedom for the individual, but the only way to create that was to suppress the majority of the population. So yes, the rich have some personal freedoms, right? And that came at the expense of making sure that the working class everywhere was in chains, constantly being held down for the benefit of the few. So we need to be building that kind of class consciousness, that we're understanding these systems so that we can create like a proletariat, a working class consciousness that's able to analyze the political situation and make these decisions. So for example, today the decision is supporting Bernie Sanders. Moving forward, it's finding these demands and these weak points in capitalism that we can attack politically and socially. And that's exactly what we need to be doing. So I highly suggest that people check out Ralph Miliband. He's a very important thinker. I highly suggest him. He really is able to get into these dynamics where he doesn't get into kind of fairy tale politics where you think you can just yell a couple slogans and that's going to change everything. But he also doesn't get into the kind of defeatist politics of a lot of social democracy. We're saying we can't change anything and we're not going to change anything if we have the power to. So yeah, Chris, he actually is related to Ed Miliband, which is a great example, sort of like Pete Buttigieg. A lot of times these great Marxist scholars, their offspring don't tend to be as radical as they are. But Ralph Miliband is very much a very important thinker. I also highly suggest Polancis, who was another thinker, contemporary of Miliband, and they actually have some really interesting debates going back and forth. We've been trying to cover these, in these theory readings, and if you're not a patron already, I highly suggest that you become one, because one, it helps us support the show, and two, we really offer more content than anybody else out there, from extra shows, extra interviews, to things like these theory readings, which we do every week, and I pick 5 or 6 different readings on different levels that we're able to jump into. So yeah, look, I think it's looking very strong for tonight. I think in the future, I'd like to, we're going to be talking a lot about elections, but I think if people, especially patrons, I'm going to be trying doing these live streams more. My background is in philosophy, and specifically Marxist political philosophy. So I'd like to be able to delve into some of these texts, and maybe we can find a way to jump into these together. So maybe we can get something together going on the Discord where we can talk about some concepts that we might want to talk about in the future, Marxist economics, different kind of tendencies within Marxism and the history of socialism. I for sure would love to talk about that more and more with y'all. And Sid had a great time at the Chapo show, got to meet Jamie, very cool. Y'all keep me sane, man. Hey, well, y'all keep me sane too. I say this all the time, but I just want to thank you guys, y'all, so much. This has been such an amazing experience over these past couple of years, building this show, building this project with all of y'all. And we're building a movement that might be able to take power. And I can't express how exciting that is. I think tonight's going to be a very good night for Bernie Sanders, as this movement has been very good for him. But remember, we got to keep on fighting. We're going to have to take on not only the Democratic establishment, but very soon we're going to have to take on the Republicans and the court system in this country. So we're going to have to be fighting for a very long time. And I'm very happy to have all of you all in my corner. We'll be on tomorrow at 7. We'll break down on these New Hampshire, the results from New Hampshire. I think Michael's going to be doing a live stream later tonight. So check out that for sure. And yeah, for sure, hit me up. Let's start sort of gaming out some live streams on political theory. I'd love to do that with y'all. All right, well, have a good one. Solidarity, and let's do it. Not me, us.